Today we are doing the book recommendation tag. Life has been not ideal recently, and last week's video was very emotional to film and edit. So this week we're just gonna do a silly sit down video. This is originally Steph's tag and I will link her channel down in the description. Tons of people have done this tag recently. I thought it would be a perfect thing for us to chat about this week. If you also talk about books on social media and you would like to do this tag, consider yourself tagged by me. I would love to see your video. Okay, so the first question is, what book do you tell people is your favorite book? So not your actual favorite book, but the book that you tell people is your favorite book. Basically, the first thing that people find out about me is that I like books, and so whenever I like run into people at a party or whatever, they're like, read any good books recently? Or what's your favorite book you've read recently? Usually I will tell them my favorite book of last year, which was How High We Go in the Dark. This is a collection of short stories, science fiction. It's got pandemic stories. It is so beautiful and dark and concerned with the human condition, and I just found this to be exceptional. The audiobook is also fantastic, so it's a really easy recommendation to anyone. If I'm not afraid to sound pretentious, I'll tell people that Paradise Lost is my favorite book, which is probably accurately my favorite book. This is an epic poem that was published in 1667, and I still think about it very frequently. I studied this while I got my English degree in college. It's not something that I probably would have read if I didn't get that degree, so sometimes it starts the wrong conversations, but sometimes it starts the right ones. Next up is your guilty pleasure book. I don't love the term guilty pleasure because I feel like we should just all be able to enjoy what we enjoy. I think typically when people hear that you read books, they assume that you're always reading these really heavy, dark, complicated, intellectual books. And I love those books. Some of those books are my favorite books, but you can't read them all the time, and you very often just need like a palate cleanser, and that's why I love cozy fantasy. I've also recently been dipping my toe into the romance genre, so if we have to categorize something as a guilty pleasure, I would put romance in that category. I would say my guilty pleasure is romance written by T. Kingfisher. Sword Heart is incredible, but people sleep on the Saint of Steel series, and all of these are also incredible. There are 3 of them. So good. These are fantasy romance. Our characters are in their 30s and 40s. They are real humans who know how to communicate with each other, and it's also a cozy, dark, funny, interesting time. This series I classify as cozy, despite there being so many beheadings. And the last book has like kind of a Saw-like torture chamber, but it still feels cozy. That is the skill of T. Kingfisher. I love this author. She's my favorite author of all time, and I love reading her romance, so that's my guilty pleasure. Next is books that everyone loved but you didn't. So I have 3 for this, and I don't love talking about things that I didn't love, so I'm not gonna spend a lot of time talking about these, but things that have a lot of hype are The Secret History, The Atlas Six, and A River Enchanted, and I didn't vibe with any of those. I also don't think that they are inherently bad books. We all have different experiences with books sometimes, and that's okay. I will say though, people who tell other people who didn't like The Secret History that they just didn't understand it, or when they do that for any book, that really pisses me off, because you can fully understand that book and also not like it. Okay, I'm done. Let's talk about more things that I liked instead. The next question is a book that you read the fastest, and I have many things for this, but I'm gonna try to whittle it down. I grabbed 3. The first one I read in one sitting, which was Watch Over Me. This is one of the first things that I picked up when I was like just getting back into reading again. I was in bed, I was ready to go to sleep. I was like, okay, I'll just read a chapter and then I'll go to bed. And I ended up just reading the entire thing in one sitting without even trying. This book is so special to me. We are following our main character who ages out of the foster care system. She goes to work on this farm teaching children. At the farm, there's this very slightly speculative element of ghosts, and initially we're like a little scared of the ghosts, but then we realize that the ghosts are manifestations of the children's trauma. We basically follow these children and our main character as they work through their trauma really deliberately and in a safe environment with lots of love and found family. It really helped me to process some things in my past and read it so unexpectedly fast, which is why I've grabbed these 2 as well. Catherine House is something that I think is perfect for a very small number of people. If you don't like ambiguous endings, you're gonna hate this. If you want to know all the answers, you're gonna hate this. This book was just perfect for me when I picked it up. I was feeling like I missed the intellectual academic conversations that I was having in college. I was feeling a little lost coming out of the academic world, going into the working world, living on my own with less structure. It was just a really up in the air sort of a time, and to be able to escape back into an academic environment where we're having cross cross-disciplinary conversations, which is really, really cool. This book does have an incredibly low rating, and I understand that it is not a book that I can recommend widely to people, but it was just perfect for what I needed when I read it, and I read it so fast. This is a dark academia type story. Catherine House is this university where you basically bring nothing with you. It's only 3 years, but you're at Catherine House the whole time. You don't go home for the summer. And there's some like weird culty stuff going on. There's some slightly speculative elements of this. And the thing that I loved the most were these conversations that we're having between different students who are studying different things, but who are coming together to have these wine, hazy academic conversations where they're just so hungry to learn and understand and feel loved. The relationships in here, the way that those relationships are discussed was so intimate in the same way that like normal people is. So I just devoured this book. And then I'm going to talk about T. Kingfisher again. This is T. Kingfisher's horror. This is The Hollow Places. This is maybe my favorite horror book of all time. I read this so fast. I had a physical copy and I had to get the audiobook, I think either on Scribd or from my library, because I could not put this book down. I love the horror in here. It plays with the fabric of reality. There's creatures in here that can hear you thinking. It is just so good and so scary. This gave me nightmares. It's one of the few horror books to actually physically scare me, and I loved it. Let's talk about books that deserve more hype. I'm gonna go a little left field here and choose some nonfictions. The first one that I have to recommend is Invisible Women. I love this book so much. This is exploring gender bias in data. Since so much of our world relies on data, especially now with AI being trained on massive data sets. This book is exploring the ways in which the data that we collect is not equal and that we're not collecting data from everyone. So if we continue collecting data the way that we collect data, then we're going to create extremely biased algorithms because they're learning off of biased data sets. And specifically, this book is talking about the gender data gap and the way that we don't collect enough data on women. Something I've been seeing a lot in the media recently is that women were not included in clinical trials until very recently, and that has really shaped the way that our healthcare system works. So if you're interested in that topic, I really urge you to pick up this book. The audiobook is fantastic. I learned so much from this book and I need more people to read it. Rackrell also needs more hype. The amount of hype that I'm seeing for Daisy Jones and the Six, this book needs more hype. Daisy Jones and the Six is not my favorite thing that I've ever read. This is so much better, and it's a very similar story. And better yet, it's all true. This is Kristen Hirsch's memoir. This is the story of 1 year of Kristen Hirsch's life. She is the lead singer of Throwing Muses. This follows her while she is 18 years old. She finds out that she has bipolar disorder and that she's pregnant. This book is just incredible. The way that it talks about music and mental health and motherhood and just growing up in general was so incredible. I read this when I was 18, so I was the same age as Kristen Hirsch is in the year that she is recounting. It just really made me think about a lot of things that needed to be thought, and I want everyone who loves Daisy Jones and the Six so much to pick this up. Okay, and the last book I have that deserves more hype is Kai-Kei. I'm gonna say something controversial here and say that this needs the same amount of hype that Babel has. Kai-Kei is everything. If you love retellings, this is a Ramayan retelling. If you love fantasy with a really intricate and interesting, unique magic system, this book has it. If you like an epic fantasy where we're following one character over a large span of years and we're really understanding what it is that makes them tick while they have to fight demons and make these really drastic decisions that change the lives of them and their family, this book does that. I love fantasy that makes me learn things, and this book did that too. I just want to see more people reading this book. Next is a book that's being made into a movie or TV show. As far as I know, I don't know of any books that I love that are currently being made into movies or TV shows, but I could be wrong, and I feel in the back of my brain like there is something that I'm forgetting about. I would like to pitch 3 books that I would like to see adapted. First is the Murderbot Diaries series. I think this would do so well as a series of movies or even a TV show. It's a series of novellas. There's 1 full-length novel. Our main character is funny. We have action. We have found family. I think it would play really well as an adaptation, and I would like to see that made. Same with the Wayward Children series. I think novella series would make perfect movies because you can't really fit a full-length novel into a movie, but you can fit a novella into a movie, and I would like to see that happen with the Wayward Children series. It's a portal fantasy. People are familiar with portal fantasy. People love portal fantasy. We're exploring so many different worlds, so the visuals would be fantastic to look at, and we're covering topics that are so relevant today. Next is a genre that I don't usually read, and I'm gonna select A Man and His Cat for this. This is a manga. I don't typically read manga. I have dipped my toe into the graphic novel world and loved what I have been experiencing. I've read this twice now and I don't reread books. Every time I read it, it makes me cry. It's making me want to pick up more manga, so if you have recommendations, I would love to hear them in the comments. Basically, this is the story of a man adopting a cat. The man is grieving. The cat has been looked over because it's not a kitten anymore and no one wants to adopt it. The man adopts the cat because he thinks the cat looks lovable. The man has no idea how to take care of a cat and he's kind of messing up, but he has so much love for the cat and the cat has so much love for him. It's just a beautiful story, sun shining on a rainy day kind of vibes. Okay, perfect. Next question is a book that I've reread the most. I don't reread books. Even books that are my favorites, I don't reread. There are so many books out there that I want to read that I feel like rereading is wasting an opportunity where I could find another book. But I have been rereading a little bit more this year. I just mentioned that I have reread A Man and His Cat. I also reread some other graphic novels and have plans to reread some more this month. I reread the Tea Dragon Society and really loved that experience. I reread a couple of books in the Wayward Children series as well. And I'm currently rereading The Song for the Wild Built and A Prayer for the Crown Chai, which is the Monk and the Robot duology by Becky Chambers. I read them so fast and I read them on audiobook, and I feel like I just want to sit with them a little bit more, so I want to return to them again this year. I'm really loving just being able to annotate and underline and think about things a little bit slower pace than I did the first time that I read these. This is like a solar punk future post-capitalist world where we have these robots who became sentient and they went into the woods basically and removed themselves from humanity. We're following a tea monk named Dex who is trying to figure out what their purpose is in life, and they find one of these robots, and the robot has a question: what do humans need? Dex helps the robot on its quest to answer this question, and the robot helps Dex on their quest to find their purpose in life, and it's just incredible. Next is a book that deserves all the hype that it has. Let's talk about Babel. This book has so much hype and it is well deserved. This is an incredibly intelligent, well-researched book that is also very entertaining. I always feel like I learn something when I read R.F. Kuang's books, and this book was no exception. I loved the way the magic system worked in here. This book is very intellectual. It is very dark. It definitely takes brain power to read, but I think it's such an important book and deserves all the hype it has. And this is a completely different book, but also deserves all the hype that it has. Legends and Lattes is the breath of fresh air that we all need when we need something cozy. We're following an orc as she leaves her life of violence to open up a coffee shop. She literally hangs her sword up to create this coffee shop and meet all of these people. There's a little romance in here. There's a mouse baker who I literally cried reading this book because of how nice everyone was being to each other, and I just needed that so much. So if you're feeling like you need some found family, some community, some people genuinely just trying to do what's best for each other even when bad things are happening, this is the book you need to read. It's not overhyped. I think it's hyped exactly the right amount, which is a lot. Okay, next is the book that I recommend the most. I feel like for me, this is kind of similar to the first question when people ask me what my favorite book is. Whenever people ask me what my favorite book is, or they ask for a recommendation, or if I've read anything good lately, typically I'm telling them about How High We Go in the Dark because it was my favorite book of last year. If people ask me for a horror recommendation, I recommend The Hollow Places. If people ask me for something that is fantasy, I recommend Sword Heart. And if people ask for something cozy, or if they like things like Midnight Library or The Alchemist, I recommend The Monk and the Robot duology. My camera is dying, I'll be right back. Okay, we're back with a fresh battery to talk about my favorite character or characters in a book. I'm gonna have to go with the whole world of The White Rat that T. Kingfisher writes. This world started with the Clockwork Boys duology, which I loved. We also have Sword Heart in this series. I think Sword Heart is a really great introduction to the world if you want to see if you like it, because it is a standalone. And there's the 3 Saint of Steel series books as well. I just love how T. Kingfisher writes her characters. I love how cozy this world is. I love how some of our characters from other books will pop up. These books are becoming my comfort reads that I think I'll keep returning to over and over. The next question is very similar, and that is a world that you wish you could live in. The world I wish I could live in is the Monk and the Robot duology world. A Psalm for the Wild Built and A Prayer for the Crown Chai. This is like the future that I wish we could all live in. This society, instead of being centered around capitalism and centered around individualism and centered around competition, instead this feels like it's centered around care And that's a concept that I had learned about academically, but hadn't actually imagined a way that that could work until I read this series. There are tea monks that you can go to if you're having a rough day, and they listen to you and talk about what's bothering you, and they make you a custom blend of tea, and you can just sit for an hour or two in the comfort of others and take a break. And I really wish that that existed in our world, and there's just so many little things like that which really gave me hope for what our world could become if we enact the change that needs to be done. Next is a book that I thought I would hate, but I actually ended up loving. So this one was a little tricky for me because I don't really read books that I think I'm going to hate. I try to be really intentional about the books that I pick up. Not fun for me to tell you that I don't like something, so I don't pick up things I think I'm not going to like. But I did do a video last year where I read all of my family's favorite books. When my dad told me that I should read The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway, I was a little bit confused, because my dad is not the biggest reader. When he does read, he reads on audio, and usually it's nonfiction businessy type books. Or I know he's read like The Da Vinci Code or like spy mystery type situations. He told me that The Old Man and the Sea was his favorite book. I was not expecting him to tell me an Ernest Hemingway book, but that book is absolutely incredible. I loved The Old Man and the Sea. It's so short, and he was right. The audiobook is fantastic. And I think I really enjoyed not just the book itself, but also all the little ways that I could look at this book and see why my dad liked it. And like knowing what I know about him and his life and where he's lived, all the things that would make him love the book so much just really enhanced my experience of the book. I also felt similarly about The Alchemist, which is my mother's favorite book. I had read it before and I remembered really liking it, but I don't know, I thought I was like above The Alchemist. I thought I was like too good for it now. I have continually reread that book every couple of years. I think I read it for the first time maybe in high school, and then I reread it again during the pandemic, and then I reread it again last year. Actually, that might actually be the book I've reread the most. So I think I lied to you in the previous question. The Alchemist is the book that I have reread the most. Every single time I pick up this book, I go, it's not gonna be as good as it was the first time. It's not gonna do the same thing. I already know what happens in the story. It does something every single time. It just does something to my brain. I don't know what it is. It's my goal one day to be able to read The Alchemist in Portuguese because the author is Portuguese. So if I can learn Portuguese well enough, that's the goal. The last question is a book that made me cry. And look, it's not hard to make me cry reading a book. Books really get me in the feels. I cried reading A Man and His Cat. I cried reading Legends and Lattes. I cried reading these books. Of course, I also cried reading A Little Life, but here's the thing. Sad things don't make me cry. It wasn't the sad parts of this that made me cry, it was the moments where everyone was really nice to each other that made me cry. Every time someone is really going through it and someone is nice to them, I cry. So it ends up happening a lot in books. And that's it. Those are all the questions in the book recommendations tag. Like I said at the beginning of the video, if you have or want to do this video, this is me tagging you. I would love to see your videos or Instagram posts or whatever on this topic. I think this is a really great list of questions to kind of get to know someone's reading taste. And if you've already done the video, I want to hear about it in the comments. If you don't post about books on social media and you want to answer these questions anyways, please do it in the comments. I would love to hear your responses. I would also love to know if any of my responses surprised you, or if you agree or disagree with any of the things that I said. That's it for me. I will see you next week. I post every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern. But if you don't want to wait until then, I have a couple of videos over here that I think you might also like if you want to just keep hanging out right now. Like I mentioned earlier, last week's video was rough, and it's been rough over here, and your comments have really put a smile on my face. I just really appreciate each and every one of you. Okay, I'll see you next week. Bye.